Awesome. So, welcome to the training session. This is the agency revenue growth path, three behaviors to avoid so you can win and retain consistent high value clients. So, by the end of this webinar, you're going to know the exact pitfalls that keep most agencies stuck in the feast and famine cycle. And you'll leave with specific strategies you can start implementing tomorrow morning to grow your agency. And more importantly, get peace of mind about where your next projects will come from. Everything here I've either done myself or helped my clients implement. But if you're in this business, you know it's not all sunshine and rainbows. In fact, you might be feeling the pressure of being just another agency among thousands. And as of 2010, the U.S. Census Bureau reported that there are more than 13,200 agencies in the U.S. alone, and many more globally who you're also up against. And just to check in, can everybody see and hear me okay now? Just want to double check. Just give me a 1 if everything's cool before I go too far and it turns out I'm talking to myself. Seeing a 1. Are we getting good? Okay, cool. I'll continue on. So obviously, this trend, the 13,200, means that there's stiff competition. And not only that, but there's a 16% rise in companies taking marketing in-house between 2008 and 2013, a trend made possible by all sorts of new technology and low-cost options. So what this is boiled down to is that something like 34% of agency professionals stated that morale was low at their companies. So you might be wondering if I'm just here to stress you out, and not at all, because there are also huge opportunities, especially if you're able to niche down to the right level. And if you're not sure how to do that exactly, or that sounds intimidating, don't worry, because we're going to dig into the exact process for specializing. And the good news is that companies, especially big enterprises, do want specialists. And why is that? Because specialists can get faster results for cheaper, and you can take bigger risks if you have an expertise. It's a lot cheaper for companies to take on these scrappier small agencies than paying a large traditional agency for the same service. Plus, big companies are looking for the vision and hunger found in these smaller organizations. So for this reason and others, I'm sure, 2/3 of advertising agencies in the US now employ fewer than 5 people. As Ruth Bernstein, founder of the Yard Agency, made the point that if you're a smart CMO trying to re-steer the Titanic from hitting an iceberg, you would want a speedboat, not a bloated cruise liner to help guide you. So big companies want agencies that match their point of view, but not necessarily their size. So this means that there are big lucrative gaps that are not being filled, and small agencies are in the best position to fill them. Oops. So you might be thinking that cashing in on these trends is much easier said than done, which is true. But I can tell you from personal experience that all this is still quite doable. And with that in mind, about me, I'm Dan Englander. I'm the founder of Sales Schema, where we help agencies generate high quality leads and develop customized sales processes for winning long-term business. I started as an account coordinator at DX Agency here in New York, where I created strategies for clients like Mark Echo Unlimited and Monster Cable. I went on to be the first employee at the animation studio Idea Rocket, where I sold high-end video services to enterprise customers. Idea Rocket started with the founder, Will Gadea, and myself, and I helped us grow from 0 to 2 million, including 18 Fortune 500s. We went from 2 to 15 employees, and I used that experience. I used what I learned to write Mastering Account Management and later the B2B Sales Blueprint. So, it was a long journey getting to that level, and I really could have saved a lot of time and aggravation had I done a few things differently. And that brings us to the task at hand, which is avoiding the 3 revenue-destroying behaviors so you can win and retain high-value clients. So let's do a quick agenda, and then we'll dig right into it. So to let you know what to expect, we'll cover each one of the behaviors followed by what you should do to avoid it and come out on top. Then we'll do some Q&A, and if you stick around to the very end, you'll get the books that were indispensable for me at each stage. And I'm having a small glitch for that page, but you should have it within 24 hours via email, assuming you stick around. That sounds good to you. So The first revenue destroying behavior is pursuing the wrong clients. And this manifests in two ways. And the first is the generalist trap, or what I like to call the generalist trap. And this is where you're everything to everyone. You're solving many different problems for many different types of clients. Maybe you do social media, content creation, web design, graphics design, SEO, and on and on. And there are a number of problems with this. For one, it's hard to scale your operations. You're reinventing the wheel on every project. It can be very low margin because this process of reinventing the wheel has many hidden costs. It's hard to get laser targeted and build trust when it comes to marketing and lead gen and sales. You might be doing outreach to different groups, and then when they land on your site, they get a vague mishmash of services, which doesn't exactly inspire trust. It's hard to align expectations. When you do a zillion different things, you don't know what your clients are expecting at each stage. So confusion, disagreement often arises, which really hinders your ability to get repeat business. And you might be wondering about agencies of record, or AORs for short, which are agencies that do everything for their clients. And this is really the exception that proves the rule, because these agencies can offer the convenience of being a one-stop shop. The problem is you really do have to do everything. If there's something your clients want and it's not on the table, then you've sort of canceled out the reason that they even go to you in the first place. Obviously, doing absolutely everything requires a lot of time and resources, and it's really a long, uphill journey to become one of these AORs. So often that's out of reach and not worth it for most agencies. So you're told incessantly to specialize and to niche down, and you might be wondering, how am I supposed to know what to offer to people? And the best way I've found to do this is with my 3-question client targeting diagnostic, which really simplifies the process in the right way. And to go over those, it's basically, where do you have leverage, where is there growth, and where is there the most receptiveness? So this is really the 80-20 of the webinar. I think if you take away nothing else, remember this process for specializing. And even if you're already doing it, just sort of keeping it in mind as you do new things. But let's dig into each one of these questions. So, where do you have leverage? What industries and verticals have created the best results for you? You've been able to get the best results for? What specific problems have you solved in those cases? If you have clients who love you, who refer you business, who are giving you testimonials without even asking, this is a great starting place. Number 2, where's their growth? So think more of macro trends here. Think of industries as a whole. And you don't have to get too crazy. You don't have to do an insane amount of research. I think a great exercise is simply Googling top growth verticals for XYZ industry, and then cross-referencing this with the clients that you determined from earlier to sort of dig deeper into that area. Number 3 is, where is their receptiveness? I think this is one of the most neglected questions when people are trying to specialize. So you want to think about where you've seen the smoothest sales processes. Think about the clients or the prospects you've talked to who have just gotten it from the very first conversation. They understand the value of what you provide from the get-go and don't need much convincing. So to give you an example in the negative way, for us, institutional financial firms definitely check boxes 1 and 2. We had some initial successes, we had some wins, some good case studies, and there was definitely growth in that space. But every time I went on a sales call with somebody in one of these firms, it just became an uphill battle because they were very traditional structures, and it was really difficult to convince them to invest in an animated video, which is what I was selling. So we eventually decided to put our energies elsewhere because the opportunity cost was just too high. So when I recommend specializing to agency leaders, I often get a lot of nods of approval, followed by a lot of anxiety and fear. You need to do it, but it's scary, and you might be thinking, won't your existing clients who don't fit the new direction leave you? Won't it be a lot of work? Won't you have to blow up your agency and reinvent it? And the good news is the answer is usually no. Your clients probably won't leave you just because you're testing out a different niche. You can experiment pretty easily, and that can be as simple as creating a landing page and doing an outbound email campaign. And the latter is something we help clients with here at Sales Schema. So the stakes probably aren't as high as you think when it comes to niching down. And once you've had some consistent wins, you can rebrand relatively easily when the time's right, so you can build, maximum trust with this new niche. So to summarize, you can visualize this client targeting diagnostic as a Venn diagram where you overlay your leverage, your macro growth, and the receptiveness of the people you're dealing with. Again, you don't have to overthink it. Start experimenting sooner rather than later. But maybe you already have a niche. Maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, and you have no trouble finding and winning clients in this niche. Yet you're still just barely scraping by, and you're not sure what to do to get to the next level. You're kind of stuck at this plateau. Chances are you're facing what I call the growth ceiling. So in a nutshell, this is when you pursue clients that have built-in opportunity limits. It's not mutually exclusive from the generalist problem, because when you specialize, you can more easily pursue higher value clients. So this growth ceiling plays out in a few different ways. For one, it means that you're pursuing one-offs. You're going for clients who will purchase one website or one atypical ad campaign or something for some sporadic need, and they may not have another need for years or ever again. Or you could be pursuing clients who can't afford you or who can just barely afford you. Convincing them is an uphill battle. The stakes are very high when you're working with them because your service is such a major investment, such a hit to their wallets. And for this reason, they tend to be a lot more anxious and needy, and all the extra work involved in serving them makes the projects less profitable for you. You might be undercharging, and usually this happens because agencies are scared to get an objection or pushback. I often hear excuses like, we're keeping prices low to build a relationship. And this is a form of resistance really to having a tough conversation and demanding what you're worth. And the result is that your perceived value becomes lower. Clients don't take you seriously, and when they have wins or successes from your service, they will eventually leave you for more prestigious and expensive competitors a lot of the time. So how do you break through the growth ceiling and grow your agency to the next level? How do you get past this plateau? The solution is not a huge surprise. You want to go for high-value clients, but the way that you do that has some nuances. So first, you want to go upmarket. Go for the companies where your service will be a line item and not a stressful, hand-wringing boondoggle. Consider your client's overall marketing budget, which tends to be around 5% of total revenues, just depending on what industry you're dealing with. And think about, in what types of companies could your service fit easily into that? Doesn't mean you have to go for a Fortune 100 company, but you probably want to go bigger than you're doing right now if you're experiencing this problem. Next, experiment with frequent price hikes. I think you should do every quarter at a minimum. And by the way, okay, just want to make sure we didn't have audio issues. All good now? Cool. So like I said, you want to experiment with this every quarter at a minimum. We went from an average project size of around 8,000 to 30,000 in a couple years, and in hindsight, we should have moved a lot faster. Also, this isn't groundbreaking advice. You probably get it other places, but I want to reiterate, be okay with outgrowing or firing clients. The types of clients you start with don't have to be the ones you end up with. Many schools of thought suggest firing the bottom third of your client roster every so often because of the huge opportunity cost in serving them. But even if you're not able to do that yet, that should be on the horizon. That should be your goal, is getting to that place. So for us, we started making and marketing ourselves to the quintessential, tech startup explainer market. And these companies really built up our portfolio. They were our base. And even though they were buying our cheapest products eventually, the shortest videos, the lowest quality ones, they were constantly second guessing the value and asking for discounts, and they were always the neediest. And the needs were just so sporadic. They would make one video and we never hear from them again. So over time, we shifted away from them and started working almost exclusively with enterprise. So that might sound like another, easier said than done thing. But don't worry, in a couple slides, I'll show you what we did to build authority very quickly. But first, I wanted to give you the third and most important strategy you need when going for high-value clients, and I really think it deserves its own slide, and that is charge based on value, not time. So, there's only 24 hours in the day, so there's a hard cap on your growth if you're charging based on time. For minor, very contained projects, this is okay, but not for your main service or your main product. Also, time for money builds resentment. Every time a client picks up the phone with you, they know you're on the clock, or they're on the clock rather. And you're probably wondering, what's reasonable value for my service? It really could be anything. It could just be all over the place. So here's a great way to price. In your sales process, determine the value of the expected outcome. If the last 5 clients you've worked with seek to do, $2 million in business through the website that you build, then that's probably a good estimation for what you're doing. And then you want to charge roughly 10% of that value, or some degree of that. And again, this process becomes much easier when you specialize. Otherwise, you have to reinvent your pricing model for every client in every situation. So you might be thinking that I'm making the process of going up market look easy. You might be thinking, but what if I don't have the authority to go for these really high-end clients? What if I don't have a million, Fortune 500 logos on my site? And that's not a huge thing to worry about. I think you can get to that place sooner than you think. And there's 3 steps to building authority super fast. Number 1 is a broken record thing, specialize. The more niche you are in terms of your clients and service, the less authority you need to build. You can really be a big fish in a smaller pool. Next is just simply building a baseline level of authority. And this usually takes the form of just a few client logos and case studies on your homepage and materials. You can use the smaller wins that you've had to build bigger ones. So what can you use to support your cause that you've been afraid to ask for? What would it take to get just one more testimonial or one case study from your best few clients if you haven't done that already? But maybe you've done that and you still need more. And this is where I like to recommend to clients and peers to consider wins in previous lives. Where have you, your partners, your employees had success in the past, even if it's in previous companies? Your clients don't really care about your logo, your tagline. They really care about the actual people they are hiring. If I'm listening to Jimi Hendrix, I'm listening to Jimmy. It doesn't matter if he's playing in The Experience or Band of Gypsies. Same with athletes. You're watching them. So make sure the experience you're promoting is honest and relevant, and you're not stretching too much, and get permission before using any logos or materials. But beyond that, it's fine to play up your experience in the previous life if it's directly relevant to what you're doing now. Number 3 is understand the purpose of authority, which is becoming a safe bet, not Superman. As you go for higher value clients, you're more likely to be dealing with employees. And their concern isn't necessarily that you achieve some earth-shattering result. It's that you keep them and their reputation safe. So, for example, IBM might not always produce the greatest results for their clients, but no one ever gets fired for hiring IBM. In the same way that no one in big Hollywood studios gets fired for greenlighting a Marvel superhero movie, even if it flops. So this is the purpose of having these logos on your site. It's becoming a safe bet. So maybe you have a good idea of who you're going after, but you're still struggling to land meaningful conversations with these people. The internet brings us a fire hose of strategies for marketing and lead generation. And just keeping up with it all is really kind of a full-time job. And you're probably so inundated with strategies that you do lead generation in sort of an inconsistent way, if you're like most of the agency owners I know. Which brings us to our second revenue-destroying behavior. In the face of so many options, most agencies don't focus their energy on achieving results with any particular strategy. You might try one thing, you get stressed out or distracted, and then you're on to the next shiny object. So for this reason, many, if not most agencies I talk to rely on completely unreliable methods for generating their business, like referrals and surprise follow-up work. Now, referrals are great, and you should build them into every engagement, but you never know when they're coming, so it's difficult to build a business around them. And maybe you have this problem, but how do you overcome it? Isn't it going to take a lot more time and resources and energy to get really consistent and start getting some results from a new lead generation method? And the good news is that it's probably not going to be as hard as you think. The way to approach it is to first simplify, then get consistent, and then scale. And with that in mind, I want to destroy the "I have to be everywhere" myth. And it's important to debunk this because it's very time consuming and resource intensive to be everywhere. And the returns from doing that are really not worth it in my experience. Less is more. If you're just getting serious about lead generation, you want to experiment with 1 to 2 inbound strategies and 1 to 2 outbound. Once one is automated and profitable, then you can throw on another. So what lead generation strategies should you start with? How do you get consistent about them and not let them fall by the wayside? First, understand that pretty much all will fall under those 2 categories, inbound or outbound. Inbound leads are knocking on your door, so you're going to start with a higher level of authority and trust, which is great. That's what you want. But the downside is that it tends to take a lot longer to produce these leads. It's kind of like planting seeds that are going to eventually grow into trees. Outbound methods, on the other hand, get you conversations, they get you results a lot faster. But since you're the one knocking on the doors, you start with a lower level of authority and trust. But as we talked about, this isn't a huge problem if you're specialized. Outbound can work really, really well. That's something that we do a lot of. So, as Gabriel Weinberg, who's the founder of DuckDuckGo, covers in his book Traction, it's really okay and even desirable to start with the methods that don't scale very well. So, for example, if you're selling marketing services to dentists, there might be just a few dozen decent dental blogs out there for you to do guest posts on. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't double down on that method to begin with and focus on it. So what lead generation methods should you really do for the long term? What should you double down on over the long time horizon? And how do you decide what will scale? So first, you want to consider your existing strengths and resources, your consistent wins, and what channels have a high ceiling for growth as for lead generation. And this probably looks familiar. It's not unlike the client targeting diagnostic. So for resources, if you're a content development shop with writers on staff, it probably makes sense to double down on content as a lead generation medium and maybe not get distracted by launching a podcast just because it's the hottest trend. Next, make sure it's an area where your experience have brought consistent wins. You don't want to double down and try to scale something that you're not sure it's going to work. And next, you want to consider what has a high ceiling for growth. So, like we talked about, guest posting probably isn't the scalable promised land for most niche agencies because there's just a finite number of sites to post on. But paid traffic, SEO, and things like that, for example, have very high growth ceilings. That could just go on forever. People just keep using those channels. So maybe you have your lead generation completely dialed in, but you're dreading your next sales call. We've all been there. We all know what that's like. Well, I'm not going to be able to make you an amazing salesperson from this presentation alone, but I can show you how to avoid the most common pitfalls that lead to your pipeline drying up. And I really think that these small changes alone will let you close more business faster than you can imagine, just changing your behaviors a little bit. And these issues, these pitfalls really fall under the third revenue destroying behavior, which is short-sighted sales thinking, which I managed to say right somehow. And the most destructive way I see this happening is when agency owners say or think, I'm not a salesperson. This tends to afflict earlier stage agency owners, but that's not always the case. And basically, they fail to take ownership over their role. They often think sales is sleazy, or they think they have to be pushy, or they think it's unnecessary. Sometimes they think that if prospects aren't convinced right away by the quality of their portfolios or the quality of their work, then they're just not the right fit, plain and simple, and they just give up on them. Unfortunately, this sort of overlooks the situation on the ground, and the fact is that your prospects are juggling dozens of options, tons of distractions, and different options from competitors, in-house solutions, or just simply doing nothing at all. And the agencies that are winning are the businesses that have strong sales departments and that are persistent and that follow through on these processes. So even if your work is strong, your potentially weaker competitors will eat your lunch if they're investing in sales in the right way. But what if you're worried about coming off as pushy or sleazy? Or maybe you're just worried you're not cut out for doing sales. It's like completely foreign to you. Well, don't worry. I really don't think there is such thing as a natural born salesperson. And in my experience, agency founders and others, working in agencies, are often do really well naturally because they have sort of a built-in genuine passion for what they're selling. If you're scared to be persistent, you have to realize that if you're the best in the world and you're talking to the right people, you're doing them a disservice by not compelling them to work with you. At the end of the day, sales is not hypnotism, and you'll never be trying to convince someone to buy something that won't help them. So aside from the ethics, it's just a lot harder to do that. So after all of that, maybe you want to have nothing to do with sales and you just decide that's not for me. That's fine. You can hire a salesperson, but it's not cheap, and most good ones won't work for commission alone as much as you think they should. And that's a common request that I get from agency owners. So this is why I encourage agency owners, especially in just starting out or in smaller agencies, to jump into the water and get used to sales calls. You might even enjoy it. But let's say you're sold on doing sales, and the head trash is not a problem for you. You're off and running, and you're not worried about getting on these calls. Still, you have this constant worry that you're leaving money on the table and that there are prospects or previous clients you should be following up with, yet you're not. If only you were more consistent, your agency would be thriving. This brings us to the next manifestation of the short-sighted sales thinking problem, which is what I like to call the sales client service shuffle. This is when you let sales fall by the wayside when you get busy with client work. So often agency owners and employees use the client work as an excuse to avoid selling because selling's harder, it can be scarier. So, make sure to listen to the stories that you're telling yourself when you're answering that client email. And the problem is that closed business and results from sales are the result of actions that you did weeks or months prior to the signature on the dotted line. So it's very important to keep sales as a continuous everyday effort because it's tough to make one of these closed deals just happen out of thin air. Turning around, the new site mock-up or other work, on the other hand, can happen just, with a bit of hustle and delegation. You can really move heaven and earth. So maybe you know how important it is to give sales its due. You've heard it all before, but you just can't seem to make it stick. And sooner or later, your client's going to send you that urgent request. You'll forget about your sales pipeline, and before long, you're stressing out all over again about where your next project is coming from. Well, the good news is there are very specific actions you can take starting tomorrow morning to make sure you're consistent about your sales process from now on. So let's get into those. The first thing you should do is give sales your complete, undivided attention once every day, preferably first thing in the morning. And it's not just about the time investment required, it's the task switching cost that's so high. If you're multitasking between sales and client calls, you're not going to be able to do either very well because both are very cognitively demanding. So to help you do that, you want to create systems and barriers to make sure you're giving sales its undivided attention. These might include email limiters, like batched inboxes, one I've used in the past, as well as just disciplined scheduling. And with that in mind, I think that providing great client service doesn't mean being on call 24/7 like an emergency room doctor. It just means setting clear and firm expectations. So that usually means scheduling things for one time in the day. Maybe you do your client calls during a block of hours in the afternoon, you do your sales in the morning. That's worked well for me in the past, but it's very personal. Finally, get the crap off your plate. Chances are there are plenty of things you're doing that could be done by computers, other people, or not at all. So a great way to make that happen is, record where all your time is spent for 1 week, plug it all into a spreadsheet, and then either eliminate, automate, or delegate the things that you are not the best person to be handling with your own time. And yes, I stole that from Tim Ferriss. But let's say this is not a problem for you. Maybe you're with a larger agency, maybe you have full-time salespeople, or you're just really good at managing your time. But yet you're still, worried about your pipeline going dry or just not working with the clients that you want to be working with. Well, guess what? Your best opportunity is probably right in front of you. And if you're anything like most agencies, you're completely neglecting it. Which brings us to the last manifestation of short-sighted sales thinking, which is what I call the account management silo. This is where you treat sales and account management or client service in general as detached from each other. This is something I come across all the time. You convince a client to work with you, you do all this hard work, you deliver amazing results, and then you wave goodbye to them. And then people like me come along, they tell you to follow up with them, that just try to get more business, and then you're stuck with nothing to say except, hey, just checking in. They all know what this means, which is, are you ready to buy again yet? It's irrelevant to them. It feels awkward to you, it feels awkward to them, and it doesn't really get anywhere. So this is a huge source of lost revenue by not attaching the next step to the first one, because your clients are many times more likely to purchase from you than strangers are. Also, there's just a lot more potential for work that's more lucrative and more compelling because you've already built so much trust. I'd say the riskiest and most interesting creative projects that we've made were for clients that they rarely happened on the first go around. They usually was after the second or third or later project. So how do you build the promise of repeat business into the first engagement and avoid the situation where you're stuck with nothing to say but just checking in? The first thing to do to avoid that is to equip account managers in sales. And even if that's not the title, it's whoever is managing the client relationship. They should be properly incentivized and trained to find opportunities and pursue them. So, I've had agency owners complain to me that their account managers just mentioned in passing, as if it were unimportant, that a client is considering rehiring them for a huge project. And the agency owners were annoyed by this. Why didn't they follow up? Why didn't they tell me sooner? Well, of course they didn't think it was important. You gave them no reason to care. They're not incentivized. They're not salespeople. They're just project managers. So you want to make sure that they're ready to go on the sales front. Next is tee up repeat business from the start by building the next step into your normal process, which might sound kind of vague. So the best way I found to do this is to implement a debrief process. When you lay out the steps to your client, you're letting them know what to expect. You might say that after the site or campaign or whatever is delivered, we'll have a meeting and we're going to help you get the best results from the thing we've just created for you. So instead of waving goodbye, you're building that in from day one. So this is your chance to find new areas of pain by asking straightforward interrogative questions. What are your plans for the new site? What revenues are you aiming to generate? What hurdles do you foresee after you launch? Questions like that. From there, you might think it's a zero-sum game. If they don't decide to repurchase or you can't find a way to get them to buy a whole new site or a whole new flagship service, again, then you've lost. Well, that's wrong because you can actually be opportunity agnostic. There's more than just one win on the table for you. So for example, yes, they could repurchase your main service. Maybe there's other departments that need a website or another huge campaign. Or maybe you sell them a smaller ancillary service. If you build websites, maybe you have an SEO partner or you can sell SEO to them, for example. Also, you can go for referrals. You can go for case studies, which are kind of a two birds with one stone thing because it's a great way to stay involved and tie their success to yours. Or if they have problems that you can't solve, you can introduce them to your partners or friends. This will bring them into your circle, it'll bring them into your fold, and they'll be much more likely to remember you and hire you again. Or you might be thinking, can't someone else do it? And the answer is yes. We generate leads through outbound email and develop customized sales processes for agencies, and you can reach me about that at dan@saleschema.com. So as I promised, we will get to resources. I'm a little bit late on that page, so I'll have to send it around over email. But you'll find out live at saleschema.com/agency resources. But for now, there's not a whole lot of us in tonight, but let's do a Q&A. What are you guys struggling with now? What are you guys still wondering about from the presentation? Chris? Okay, so Douglas, how long can we expect to take a client from first contact to first paid sale? I'm not entirely sure what you mean. So how long can we expect to take a client from first contact to first paid sale? So how long, if you mean by how long of a sales cycle, how long that should take? Or you mean like a prospect from first contact to first paid sale? I think it can vary a little bit. In my experience, I think 2 weeks is pretty good as a minimum. It really depends on how much you're nurturing them beforehand and how much you're warming them up, which is kind of moving more into marketing land. But I think that if it's moving past 2 weeks for most creative agencies, then it's probably somebody that's dying on the vine. So I would kind of look to that as a benchmark. Thank you for joining, everybody. As I mentioned, the resources and the books that have helped me along the way will be out to you over email. And the site, once I fix the glitch, will be salesschema.com/agency resources. Let's go back to that real quick. Very good. Thank you, everybody. Have a pleasant evening. We'll talk soon.